Another ongoing issue is that the President, General Muhammad, beg your pardon, Mr. Muhammadu Buhari, has given approval to the recommendation of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited to invest 1.9 trillion naira in the reconstruction of 44 federal roads under the tax credit policy. The Federal Executive Council approved the recommendation to invest in the reconstruction of selected federal roads under the federal government's Road Infrastructure Development and Refurbishment Investment Tax Credit Policy, the second phase, by the NNPC Limited and its subsidiaries. We've been having reactions following these because some individuals are saying that the NNPC Limited should actually be focused on supplying petroleum products, as we see the persisting petrol queues in the country, major metropolis in the country. We have seen, we also saw that story yesterday where there's officially an increase in the price of petrol to 185. Awaiting more conversations and confirmation on that. But meanwhile, of course, getting the NNPC Limited involved in infrastructure refurbishment and rehabilitation has also brought up some conversations. That's why we decided to dwell on this morning. We have Mr. Nemeka Obiareri, the Managing Director of Taurus Capital, joining us for this conversation. Mr. Obiareri, good morning. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Morning, thanks for having me.
So some Nigerians are saying that as much as we do need infrastructure in the country, why should the NNPC get distracted with this infrastructure rehabilitation, infrastructure refurbishment, when we still have gaps when it comes to petroleum products and its distribution in the country?
I still ask the same question. It's the same question that I asked when I read that report. Firstly, by the provisions of the RITC, the NNPC is saddled with a responsibility of managing our refineries and ensuring that the downstream oil and gas sector and even the upstream is working effectively. When you look at the number of the amount of money that they've committed or they are committing towards this road construction, you will discover that if you are to divide it by the official exchange rate, it will be enough to build brand new refinery about 300,000 barrels a day, which can be delivered within 5 years. So it is worrisome. And again, we also have to look at the whole fundamentals, the whole principles, the whole implementation structure behind this road infrastructure development program under APPD framework. Remember, it's a way of receiving tax credit from FIRS. And if you look at the kind of federation we run a three-tier system of government. And tax revenue from company income tax is actually supposed to go into the federation account and to be shared between the federal government of Nigeria, the states and the local government areas in the ratio of 52%, 24%, and 20%. So when the federal government of Nigeria, because if you look at the structure, the whole thing has to revolve around the federal government of Nigeria. And it's also worrisome because if you look at our physical federalism, the structure we have, for this arrangement to work, there's no gainsaying that we need it in Nigeria because based on the infrastructure deficit in this country, we will require about 3 trillion naira, 1,308 trillion naira to be able to cover the infrastructure gaps in Nigeria within the next 30 years. That simply means on an annual basis, Nigeria must invest $100 billion to be able to fix the huge infrastructure deficit in Nigeria. But the framework for its execution must be properly spelled out. You know, why Nigeria worked so well between 1960 to 1966? It was because of the physical structure that we ran, based on what a federation should be. It is structure, the same structure you have in the US, Malaysia, and other people who have implemented this framework to financing infrastructure development. We have to, first of all, tweak our constitutional and fiscal framework for this to work. And how do we do it? In between 1960 to 1966, we had a constitutional and a revenue regeneration and shared arrangement where the constituent units were allowed to collect the revenues, every revenue, and then retain 50%, pay 30% to the port, general port, to be shared between the less privileged regions, and then 20% is given to the federal government. And then on the exclusive list, the federal government was allowed only to control things like security, international relationship. Most of the things we have then, we have at the regional level. Nigeria grew at an average growth, GDP growth of almost about 6-9%. In 1965, the old Eastern Nigeria was growing at about 9-10% per annum GDP growth. So we need to, for this to work, we need to look at the physical and functional framework of Nigeria. That is the only way. When we have such arrangement, we can be able to apply this kind of PPP to be able to develop Nigeria. But where we have 3 tiers of government, the taxes are supposed to go to creation account. And the federal government of Nigeria, the federal Ministry of Finance, the federal Ministry of Works, are the ones that determine the roads that will be constructed. We don't even understand even the holistic framework. Nigeria today requires new road network of about 40,000 kilometers. South Africa has a road network of about 750,000 kilometers. Their paved roads is about 158,000 kilometers. Nigeria today has a road network of just only 195,000 kilometers. And the paved element of it about 60,000 kilometers. And half of those 60,000 kilometers are in very dilapidated state. So if South Africa, with a landmass of about 1.2 million square kilometers, have paved road network of 158,000 kilometers, and Nigeria, that is a little smaller than South Africa in landmass, 93,000 square kilometers, has only about 60,000 paved roads. We should be thinking about within the next 10 years, next 20 years, how do we pave 40,000 additional kilometers of road while working on the existing road network to make sure they work. And this framework to make it work, the fiscal revenue cannot allow us to do this. Don't even look at the budget of 2023, 4.9 trillion that was approved across the whole to take care of the whole sector, infrastructure development. Nigeria cannot depend on fiscal revenues. We must explore these options, PPPs, this kind of tax credits to companies. But the fiscal framework must be right. And that is why we have always advocated for constitutional fiscal federalism, where resource control, resource distribution, and more responsibilities are devolved to the constituencies, to the states and local government area, just the way we had it in 1960s. By so doing.
All right, Mr. Obiare. Mr. Obiare, so what do you see wrong with this tax credit policy? I mean, one could say for the need that you have highlighted, that's why we have the NNPCL jumping on this boat, you know, to also provide that infrastructure that even they need to supply their products, you know. So what is wrong with the policy, this policy? What should be added or what should be subtracted?
Okay, what is wrong is the framework for the implementation. Remember, the company income tax is one of the revenues supposed to go into the federation account. The revenues in the federation account belong to the states, the local government, and the federal government. Under the current constitutional and fiscal framework, it is shared 52, 24, and 20 to the 3 tiers of government. So I found it, you know, I see it as abnormal for the federal government of Nigeria in 2019 to put an order where tax revenues are supposed to go into the federation account. Because when you give companies tax credit, it simply means the tax they are supposed to pay to the federal account is applied towards road construction. The federal government of Nigeria determines the roads that will be constructed. Some of these revenues were paid in the federal account. The federal government receives their own portion. So if it is their own portion that they are applying towards the roads that they choose, federal government, it's understandable. But going ahead to collect in advance tax that is supposed to come into the federal account and then only at the federal level determine how it's going to be dispersed is not acceptable. It does not augur well with the spirit and letter of the Constitution on the Fiscal Federalism Framework of Nigeria. For it to work, I'm an advocate of public-private partnership arrangements in development of infrastructure in Nigeria. I give an example. For us to even have good rail network that works, we must have at least 12,000 kilometer new rail lines, which will require about 38 trillion naira to implement. We require at least 40,000 kilometer new roads. We require at least on the areas of power to generate about 60,000 megawatts of power, build the distribution on the grid network to move it. But the physical framework, the constitutional framework must be right.
Okay,
so that the federal government does not usurp revenues meant for the states and the local government areas.
So, Mr. Berry, are you saying that instead of this tax credit policy, then the government should be, because you're advocating PPP, are you saying maybe areas like concessioning? Is that what you would prefer to see?
Yes, on the rail network, to do 12,000 kilometer rail network within the next 10 years, we must embrace the PPP framework, concessioning some of the rail routes. Sometimes I wonder how we run like that. The most lucrative rail route in Nigeria is the one that goes from Lagos to Shagamu, to Djibouti, to Ore, to Benin, to Asaba, to Onitsha, to Owerri, to Aba, circle back Okigwe, Umuahia, to Oka, to Onitsha, and then to Port Harcourt. This is a rail route that, based on the cargo and the human traffic, can repay itself in 15 years under a 45 years constitutional arrangement. It's just about 875 kilometers based on what the site that have been conducted. But because the rail infrastructure is within the purview of the exclusive list, some of the creative ideas that revolve around PPP are not being implemented. So, like I said, to grow the infrastructure of Nigeria, we must be able to invest consistently on a sustainable basis $100 billion over the next 30 years. But that cannot happen under the kind of constitutional and fiscal framework that we are operating now. And that is why some of us are being at the highest decibel. For Nigeria to work for the entire benefit of the whole constituent, we must go back to the constitutional and fiscal framework that works for us between 1966, where regions, the constituent units, states are allowed to control the resources, generate resources. Companies within, see, it is how America has developed. It is the same framework. California generates all the revenue, pays certain, and by this framework, companies migrate to areas where there are incentives for them to station and work. So where we have an arrangement where let the constituent units generate their revenues, then pay 50%, keep 50% of it, pay 30% of those revenues as tax to the general port, and 20% of it to the federal government, and let the responsibility of the federal government be reduced to what we used to have between that. In this way, we do not have a strong center that is prone to monumental corruption, clannishness, feudalism that has been destroying Nigeria over the last 50 years. PPPs are the way to go. You can never fund infrastructure deficit using fiscal revenue. I give you an example. Nigeria requires $100 billion, 43.6 trillion naira every year. If you look at what they provided in the federal government budget, 4.9 trillion is almost 10% of what we require. We cannot build and cover the deficit in Nigeria. On the housing sector, we have over 20 to 28 million housing deficit that will require over 516 trillion to fix. Based on the budget, if we depend on the federal government or what they are trying to do, it will take us over 300 years. But if we tweak our physical and constitutional framework back to those golden years, that was why we had the groundnut pyramid and cotton of the north. You had the cocoa of the west. You had the coal and the palm oil of the south, of the old Israel. Do you know that in 1965, the old Eastern Nigeria and the old Western Nigeria controlled 45% of the global palm oil market? Today, that market is $110 billion worth. If we had not allowed ourselves to be misled by the framework we have today and focus on the fossil fuel, if we had maintained that rate, today Nigeria would have been exporting nothing less than over $38 billion worth of crude palm oil. You cannot reinvent the wheel. The regions that houses this belt, the west, southwest that had the cocoa belt, I have no incentive again to explore inward, to build up the critical revenue through the whole value chain, because everybody has been made lazy because of the current warped quasi-unitary constitution that we are running.
All right.
If we want to fix this country, we need to go back to that constitutional and fiscal framework that worked for us in the early years of Nigeria.
All right, Mr. Naimeka Obiariri, thank you so much, Managing Director of Taurus Capital. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, asking for us to go back to those former days, golden days, as you call them. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.